And welcome everyone to our session, Streamline, Manage, and Secure Your Operational Technology Assets. I am Piyush Patel, a technical product marketing manager for our IT assets and operational technology solutions at ServiceNow. And I'm super excited to be here. Joining me today is Bradford Blair.
Yeah, thanks for that intro, Piyush. Real excited to be here with you as well. I'm an outbound product manager currently focused on our physical asset management products, one of which is operational technology asset management. And I have a lot of eagerness to discuss this with you all further and look at some ways that we can help you all find some practical solutions to increasingly complex challenges in the industrial environments.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So before we get started, I do like to point out our safe harbor notice. Everything we are covering today is part of our product release, but the presentation may include forward-looking statements. This statement should not be relied upon in making any sort of purchasing decisions. As for the agenda of the session, in today's session, we'll cover industrial organizational challenges, ServiceNow approach to address those challenges, a short demo of our enterprise and operational technology asset management solutions, how the two kind of converging in the industry based on some of the personas, and then towards the end, key takeaways from today's sessions with additional learning resources for you guys to kind of come up to speed on what we covered. But before we get started, Brad has a question for all of you here. So Brad, take it away.
That's right. Let me fire up this poll here. I'm just going to grab it. But only 2 poll questions, so fear not, we're not going to bombard you. But this is something that just let us know where we're meeting you all at. And so quite simply, you should see a pop-up in your Zoom screens, by the way. And the question is how familiar are you with operational technology asset management? All answers welcome here, from a lot all the way down to new to me, tell me more. Getting a good response rate. I'm going to not lie, it's not great. It could be great. There's a lot of amazing people on this call, and that warrants an amazing response rate. Now we're getting somewhere. Last chance to let us know where you're at.
We're at 75%. Come on, guys. There we go.
All right, we'll roll with that. But that's very helpful for us. Let me share these results. We can take a look. So, Piyush, what I'm seeing here is a mix of everything, which makes me very happy. Look at that, 230s and 220s. So, I think we're going to very much meet everyone where they are. And for those of you that know a lot or somewhat, very keen to get some of your insights and takes on some of the fundamentals we're going to discuss here. And while I'm talking about that, throughout this presentation, feel free to type any questions you have in the Q&A. I, of course, would suggest that they're related to the topic, but by all means, free country, you can type any question you want. Just make sure you use that Q&A feature rather than chat. And we'll do our best to answer all of them. I'm not guaranteeing we will, but when one of us is talking, the other one will monitor it. And, if time permits, we can maybe kind of round robin through those. Piyush, anything you want to add to the poll?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, we presented this same presentation and a demo at the knowledge session last month in Vegas. And interestingly, there were more people, in one-on-one conversation after the demo, that were looking to one, they already were familiar with ServiceNow investment into the OT, operational technology, and they wanted to see a bit more advanced use cases, right?
Sure.
And so it was more based on our experience. We have a lot of people in that, top two questions you have, a lot and somewhat, but we want to see more before we kind of justify making any sort of a forward decision. So some of the material we have, use cases, challenges, hopefully will highlight why we're choosing this topic and to kind of sharing with you. If you're not seeing that topic being discussed in your organization today, be sure that it's coming up, because that's what we're seeing in the industry, is that convergence of IT and OT kind of bubbling up to the same stakeholders, right, with the same challenges. So yeah.
Absolutely. Let me stick a further pin in that, and let's go ahead and proceed into I'm going to spend the next few minutes laying the foundation for the challenge. I'm then going to point out some of the use cases that come out of the box that will help address these challenges. And then Piyush is going to give a demo. So I hope I've given you the insight into what we're going to accomplish here. But let's hover on these common industrial challenges. And what these are doing is they're showing how both physical issues and digital outages can cause production downtime. The one that really sticks out to me, and yes, acknowledge that it probably sticks out to me because I work for ServiceNow and I'm always looking for ways that we can help maximize efficiencies. 90% of manufacturing employees are using spreadsheets weekly. Now, of course, there's a lot of context behind that. Inevitably, a spreadsheet will be opened up, but I think it's pretty safe to say that there's a lot of opportunity there to help these manufacturing employees and industries ensure that when they're doing data input, they're doing it in an environment that won't be siloed in a spreadsheet. And they're doing it in a way that will foster automation. If you then take that challenge and you match it to the other two data points, top of mind, of course, for both the reputational and bottom line implications is when these increasingly connected industrial assets, and we'll get into what that means here shortly, are susceptible to being breached. It's just, we all see the headlines. So this is something that is really timely, and it's increasingly important. And that leads us to the viewpoint and the ethos of the ServiceNow platform, and more particularly our suite of asset management products. What can we do to help users of these products take the data that they have and then use that to automate some of the workflows, some of the actions, some of the insights that are going to help them ensure that they're maximizing availability, minimizing security risk, and optimizing cost. As we dive deeper into operational technology asset management, just know that like all of our other asset management products and also all of our other operational technology products, it resides on the same Now platform. And so what we're doing is we're essentially up-leveling those various spreadsheets that reside potentially in multiple locations, and there's multiple versions of them, and we're empowering the users to work from the same shared platform and data model with the same data, so that when you're planning for the deployment of that conveyor belt, or you're planning to retire that CNC controller, everyone has the latest and greatest lifecycle info. And when we do that, you're going to be in a position to, at minimum, be able to answer these questions that we have listed here, and then more as you get more advanced and more likely as you proceed on this journey, you're going to be able to answer them in a beneficial way to your company. I'll pause there. Piyush, anything you want to add that maybe I missed? Oh, Piyush, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was gonna, what I was saying is those that are already doing the asset management work with some of our other solution in hardware, software, you kind of start to see this whole life cycle that we constantly bring and share with you, right? Everything from acquisitions to the the disposal. On the OT side, it's a similar process, but now you have more operation centric, more security patching and things like that. So we're kind of following that same methodology that a lot of you are already familiar with it. So in turn, basically, if you do take on this business for your stakeholders, the learning curve, sure, it's a different CI items, it's a different workspace, but the concept of managing this asset within the organization, between sites, between locations, securing them, discovering them, it follows that same asset management fundamentals.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you for tying that together, Piyush. And let's, as always, we want to address the platform, the baseline, and what's similar. Now let's get to what's different, because we are talking about a different type of asset here. We're talking about industrial assets specifically. And I fully recognize and acknowledge that there is indeed more nuance, both known and also unknown, as technology that continues to evolve, that is not covered in this sheet. Alas, we only have 60 minutes. And I do find that this is a great starting point to talk about two key distinctions with industrial assets. So what do I mean by that? Let's start with the column on the left side. These are connected operational technology assets. If I use the acronym OT, that's what I'm referring to. I will try to avoid using the acronyms as much as possible. Speaking of acronyms, here's more acronyms representing these various, essentially they're specialized computers. Are they like the computers that you and I are on right now? No, but they are designed as, computer systems, and their job more often than not is to operate within these heavily industrialized environments, whatever the industry is manufacturing or supporting. Obviously, as the name would imply, these are connected assets, but they don't necessarily reside on things like SCCM or ServiceNow Discovery, those technologies that are used for the IT assets, if you will. So when we think of that, we think of the computers we're on now, we think of software licenses. Those are very important things, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about these connected industrial assets that are often discovered by completely different technologies. The ServiceNow OT products integrate with many of those. We're not going to dive too deep into that here, but the point I'm trying to make is that as we proceed along with level setting where that data is coming from and what kind of data points we're looking at, OT asset management is going to essentially, come into that picture and provide some of these workflow enabled asset lifecycle events to support the use cases that are unique to these connected OT assets. Now I'm going to share some of those here in a second. Let's go to the right-hand side, which is the non-connected operational equipment. This is the stuff that, at least I tend to think of, for better or for worse, when I think of industrial, which is really unfair of me because industrial is increasingly so technologically advanced. But The big ovens, the big conveyors, the pumps, all of that stuff is alive and well. It's just managed differently and it's configured differently, increasingly with those connected OT assets on the left. And then often many operational technology assets are essentially deployed in a manner that's integrated with the operational equipment on the right. So it's not sufficient to track both of them just individually. You have to track both of them as a model. That's the ServiceNow abstraction of saying, hey, I have this model that includes the operational technology asset and then however many operational equipment assets it's managing or feeding data points to. And I need to know that relationship. And I need the ability to either A, service one or many of them independently, or B, I need to service all of them at once. And we'll get into some scenarios where that would be applicable here shortly. Piyush, anything you want to add here before I proceed?
Really, a lot of the manufacturers we're talking to are kind of building their kind of a roadmap towards the digital connected future, right? And so what you're seeing here is the both connected and non-connected OT assets. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for them to be able to make sure their entire factory or the assembly line and everything that is included on that floor are being managed properly in a single system of records, so they can get to the discovery of it. What's the uptime, what's the downtime, the life cycle state, the maintenance. So this is why we're kind of talking to you as a unifying all of your industrial asset on a single platform. And that's the kind of uniqueness about having a ServiceNow solutions, where you'll see in the demo where multiple personas across the enterprise can get their work done on a ServiceNow platform.
Exactly. So let's go into some of those use cases. This is not all of them, but these are ones that we feel are worthy of sharing in the 60 minutes we have. Everything I'm showing now are features that come with OT asset management. Right now is controlled go-to-market. So all these features and functions that I'm showing here are things that don't reside with the other OT products. So what we're showing here is how, going back to the previous two slides that we mentioned, we laid the foundation for, the challenges of industrial environments and then the unique considerations of industrial assets. Now let's look at some of the features that are tailored towards that specificity while still allowing us to take advantage of that Now platform for the other things that, of course, that business will manage outside of asset management or OT per se. So what we're looking at right here is proactive maintenance plans and work orders. So this is an out-of-the-box module. When I say module, if you look at the screenshots, you'll see on both of them, there's a blue banner running up and down. And then within that blue banner, you'll see icons, which we call modules. And as you would probably guess, the wrench signifies the work management module. And what we're showing here is the ability to take a proactive and reactive stance to the maintenance of your industrial assets. Both are needed. When we're talking proactive maintenance, let's say the manufacturer guidelines for some of your operational equipment specifies that it's recommended that the items are inspected every 2 months or whatever the time period is. You as the asset manager or the plant manager or whatever your title is, the reality is that you're in charge of making sure that that equipment is maintained. You will go into operational technology asset management and create a maintenance plan for those. and you will dictate when it gets triggered, in this case by duration. And then you will also ascribe to it checklists that you create. You'll create those based on either A, the manufacturer considerations, or perhaps some leading practices unique to your organization. And then once all of that's configured and things are set up, when the interval comes for that next 2 months out, the system will automatically create the work orders and send those out to the technicians for them to complete the work. So that's an example of proactive. There, of course, are going to be times where reactive is not just necessary, but also, very much leading practice. Let's say a Gemba walk's being performed or something like that, and something is not correct, whatever it may be, with an asset. Maybe you notice one of the operational technology terminals or displays needs to be rebooted, whatever it may be. You can then use the same module if you're the actual asset manager or technician to create that work order, or you can leverage other features and functions to empower end user technicians through the other operational technology products to submit that request. So we're providing a lot of these things that perhaps, if we go back to the challenges, weren't necessarily being done in a digitized way, but we're bringing that onto the Now platform, and we're bringing a lot of that ethos to how we're accomplishing these things. Piyush, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, really, the pain point, the challenge number 2 that you showed earlier, 65% of enterprise asset manager we surveyed reported that they do not have a suitable solution to do just this, optimize their maintenance schedule and avoid the downtime, right? And so this particular workflow takes care of that out of the box, where it allows your team to be able to be proactive about it. And let's not forget how it could increase the life cycle of that asset. Just like any other asset at home, you might be, looking at the HVAC systems, how you change filters and, have a freon refilled and things like that. Same concept, but you're talking about a large, complex, system with a specific prescriptive maintenance calibration, schedule and recommendations from vendors. So this really kind of addresses that out of the box.
Exactly. I've got a few more to go through here, and I want to make sure I leave ample time for Piyush's demo. Do a little time check here. I'm always very selfishly excited about asset total cost of ownership. I think it's going to provide a lot of these organizations the ability to increase financial efficiencies that they haven't been able to do before. Not for lack of ability. We're not talking about rocket science here. We're just talking about surfacing it in a way that allows for it to be very visible and very transparent. So as we proceed to embrace more and more of these connected operational technology devices and how the operational equipment is working in unison with them, we want to look for opportunities to give users of OT asset management the ability to ensure that they're making the most cost-effective decisions. What do I mean by that? Let's say you've got 2 configurations of a CNC lathe machine. For whatever reason, you had one configuration, we'll call that configuration A, and then you had another configuration B. As your adoption matures on OT asset management and you start ingesting all the data in terms of time worked on fixing parts, the cost to get repairman parts, the initial purchase cost for things, that will be tallied up automatically by the tool. And then when you go into asset total cost of ownership, you'll be in a position to essentially compare CNC lathe configuration A, CNC lathe configuration model configuration B against the benchmark that you set. And then when you do that, you're going to be empowered to say, hey, this is just one data point, of course, but it looks like the A model is a bit more cost effective than the B model or vice versa. And then those are the type of things you can use to really have some important conversations about how do we want to ensure that, yes, of course, safety is paramount, efficiency in terms of output is paramount. Once we know that those two are covered, is there an opportunity for us to choose the assets that cover those, but do that in a more cost efficient way than others? So we're real excited about this feature, and already eager to see what customers are doing with it. Simplify onboarding for single and multi-asset use cases. This is us trying to be as practical as possible. At ServiceNow, we of course are going to ascribe to the best leading practices when it comes to asset management and a diligent focus on the life cycle of an asset. We recognize that reality may not always match up to that. So we don't want to dilute the importance of that, but we do want to meet customers where they are. What do I mean by that? Some of these organizations, there may only be one person who is the asset manager or the operational manager, whatever their title is, but that one person may not be the only person that receives assets. We're talking about global companies here. You don't even need to be global. Companies that have multiple regional locations or local locations, there might be other users involved that receive assets. That isn't in their 9-to-5 job description per se, but that's the reality. So what can we do to allow them to provide the information that's needed so that that asset is onboarded in an efficient way, and then that the asset manager is able to then proceed with ingesting that information within acquisition. So what we've allowed for end users, and these are people that don't have to have any type of OTAM licensing per se. These are just people that have access to the Now platform. They can go into the employee service portal and basically submit an onboarding request saying, hey, I received 1 or 10, 20, hundreds of assets. And then the onus will be on them, of course, to input, the serial number, the unique asset tag. But once they do that and submit that request, that allows for that information that perhaps if we're making some educated assumptions from the challenges we looked at earlier, information that at that point was just residing on a spreadsheet somewhere, now it's in the platform. Now the asset manager can follow these prescriptive steps to make sure they're onboarded correctly. These are not meant to replace existing best practices. We recognize that there's going to be a lot of unique due diligence that's done at a lot of these manufacturing and industrial companies. But these are things that, at the very least, we think it's important to at least think about making sure that you have some key asset details, to think about some of the maintenance implications of these items. And ideally, you'll put all that information in as you onboard it. If not, that's okay. You can use it as an opportunity to say, hey, we can skip this for that reason, or hey, we don't have that information now, but we'll come back to it later. So this is something we're pretty psyched about bringing out to the environment a little bit more. I do see one question in here real quick, so I'm going to do it. What is the ownership in the ServiceNow context? The financial owner of the OT asset or the physical owner? So the ownership of the financial owner of the IT asset or the physical owner. So the way I think this question is referring to OT asset or to total cost of ownership. And I apologize, I don't fully understand the question, but what that is doing is it's showing, we're assuming that in this case, both the person who's managing the asset and then is also the financial owner of it as well. So I recognize that there's some managed use cases out there and happy to sidebar conversation that. But for purposes of this viewpoint, what we're talking about is a situation where the owner of the asset is also the operator of the asset. OT asset management does, of course, include the ability to look at assets that are being leased. So maybe for some of those ones that are leased, you're not necessarily tracking the total cost of ownership in the same way. And it's not something you have to use for every asset, but for those scenarios where it's important to the user of the product to have that information, they can do that. Optimize asset and spare parts inventory. This is us providing the ability for inventory management. So what are some ways that we can enable users of OT asset management to create stock rules? And then based on those stock rules that are tied to specific stock rooms, these, of course, are things that would be input by the user of OT asset management. Every environment is going to have different stock rooms. What are some things that we can do to ensure that thresholds are never exceeded or depleted in terms to key spare parts in inventory? So when we're talking about manufacturing industrial use cases, you can see the value of that in terms of making sure you have the requisite parts, not only for things that are being produced, but also the assets that are being produced themselves. So this is a feature that I think is going to dovetail nicely into some of those things we were talking about. Piyush, anything you want to add to that one?
I mean, this kind of goes back to a lot of the use cases with the physical business assets or enterprise assets, a lot around having a stocked inventory available, a visibility into what's in the stock, right? And do we need to source from the vendor or third party?
Yeah.
And this becomes critical on some of the industrial assets. If conveyor belt or the tractor straps breaks, then if those were contracted or were scheduled based on the throughput, right? It has a implications on, at the end of the day, did it produce what we estimated and paid to do? So a lot around having those parts readily available, right? Whether they were recommended by OEMs or the life cycle, that they break sooner or tend to require maintenance, and be able to get to them quickly.
Exactly. Okay, one more use case, and then Piyush is going to do a demo here. So this is operational asset move orders. And so this gets back to a comment I was making earlier about the ability to not only address individual components that make up a CNC lathe machine, such as proactive maintenance of certain parts, but then also the ability to execute life cycles for the whole CNC lathe itself, inclusive of all the various operational technology and OE equipment items that are in it. In this case, a move. So inevitably, there'll come a case where maybe something needs to be moved across a facility floor, or maybe to a different facility entirely. Having the ability to have that information in the tool and be able to put in things like moving slips, whatever it may be, to perform that due diligence while you're completing the work. So it's not something that after the fact, oh man, I got to go back and update this Excel spreadsheet. While we're doing this, at the moment where the information is clearest and freshest, and it's most advantageous for everyone involved to do it, we're going to provide the ability to do that. And then everyone is going to be working from the same sheet of music, essentially. So this is a cool feature that I spent some time demoing, and I'm really excited to see how people use it, not only in conjunction with some of the other OT products, but for those that are also leveraging the indoor mapping features that come with the asset management products, the ability to then track that way as well.
Brett, there is a question that just
Yeah, let's take a
came
look.
through and has to do with the industry assets having an expiration dates, right? Um, Things like capacitors that
Yeah.
tend to degrade over time.
So answer yes. So we at present there is no curated content, but you have the ability to use fields to populate that information. We recognize that, and I'm leaning very much into safe harbor here. What can we do to perhaps provide content in a way that's going to be usable for all? That's something that we're getting out into roadmap, safe harbor land a little bit. But in terms of the immediate ask, um, you can input that information, you can then assign it to a model, and then based off of that information, you can then ensure that your workflows are geared towards, hey, something is degraded, it's end of life, we need to execute on replacing it or repairing it. All right. Piyush, I think it's time for you to do a demo.
Yes, sir. So let me go ahead and grab the screen from you.
Yes.
And then if you could confirm that you are looking at
Joe Kenzie, Enterprise Asset
Joe
Manager.
Kenzie. Perfect. So great. So I'm going to cover some of the things that you already heard from us in terms of the personas, the total cost of ownership and things. So for this demo, what we've done is simplified some of the roles and function we will cover today, but we know that maybe completely different role within your organization. So in this case, Joe, who is our enterprise asset manager, also has access to the OT asset dashboard, right? And that's the uniqueness about ServiceNow platform is a lot of these workspaces and dashboards can be accessible, of course, based on role and access control, but it's all on part of the platform. And here's Joe looking at the asset dashboard to see what assets have been discovered. So now, Brett talked about the discovery of these assets. There's no SCCM or things like that, but there are ways to discover OT assets, right? So let's talk about how we are able to get OT assets into ServiceNow. So when assets are discovered and brought into ServiceNow, much information is collected, and anything that's missing can be added later. One of the key features of ServiceNow platform is that it allows you to display the data you're seeing here in interactive reports. And what you're seeing then here is at the bottom of the screen, how we are able to bring in the different OT assets into ServiceNow by Excel spreadsheets, Service Watch, third-party integrations like Microsoft Defender for IoT, Clarity, and Dragos. These are all common integrations that are built by ServiceNow that can bring some of these assets in ServiceNow. Now, Joe is also responsible for the enterprise assets, right? These are your physical OT devices, operating equipment, or parts and tools that are used to maintain these assets. So, and Joe's been asked to provide a cost comparison report for laser cutting machine between the New York and Santa Clara plants. So Joe starts with total cost of ownership dashboard. Notice the data here reflects many different business assets such as MRI machine, laser cutting equipment, and even construction equipment. So earlier in the day, based on this ask, Joe kind of went ahead and built a report, created a report to compare the cost of the laser cutting machine model. And while he's generating this report, he has an option to use the actual cost, but he can also use the projected cost, which would include the entire life cycle over of the asset, the entire lifespan of this asset. And so then once he's done with this and clicks on the report, he can see a cost breakdown this asset, of this laser cutting machines between two different models: the maintenance, the warranty, the repair, the labor, and so forth, right? But what this report actually is doing, it is explaining that cost center owner, the physical owner, and or the financial owner. Question was, who owns this asset? Could be combination of both teams, right? But what it's doing is it's clearly presenting why it's not economically feasible to maintain and operate this older model when this new asset's going to cost them less, right? So now Joe can use this data and raise the asset refresh date rather than waiting until the end of the cycle. So just in few clicks, Joe found an opportunity to kind of maximize the value of his high value laser cutting machine, all from a single workspace. Now, discovering your assets is very important in the asset management space, but how you secure them is equally important. And that's where Robert comes in. So Robert is responsible for managing the security of all the industrial devices and protecting them against threats like ransomware, denial of attacks, etc. So Robert starts his day with industrial workspace, where he's able to kind of view the state of the OT security of all the location he's responsible for. And he notices there are 10 active vulnerabilities, in the Atlanta manufacturing area. The workspace also kind of gives Robert a lot of different dashboards out of the box. This is where he can kind of quickly see how his team is doing with managing the vulnerabilities, some of the SLAs and KPIs and things like that. Now, back to those 10 vulnerabilities in the Atlanta manufacturing, right? So Robert wants to know, well, how about, who's going to manage these? How are they being managed? So he reaches out to Troy. Troy is an industrial control system engineer who does the day-to-day managing and patching of the connected devices for that Atlanta plant. And Troy logs into industrial workspace and notes that there are the same 10 vulnerabilities that have popped up on his workspace that requires some attentions. And most of these, again, they're part of the manufacturing side. So what Troy's going to do is going to try to get a kind of a high level overview of where this 10 vulnerability exists. So he navigates to the equipment model and drills down into that manufacturing work center too. Now, it's worth noting that because how ServiceNow maps the relationships between all these different configuration items in CMDB, Troy can view that equipment model hierarchy in a visual format by looking at the OT dependency map. And this is kind of a super cool because it actually maps out everything from the manufacturing floor to the parent child all the way down to the subcomponent of the hierarchy. Now let's look at those vulnerabilities that were discovered on the OT devices. And what he's looking at here is there's a lot of information being pulled, not only from the configuration items itself, but also from the vulnerability scanner, such as the summary of the vulnerabilities, the OT devices. In this case, it's the PLC controllers, manufacturers, risk scores, and things like that. And this is super important because this data provides Robert and Troy with the information they need to kind of quickly determine what the next steps are. And so then, speaking of the next steps, what Troy's going to do is going to create an action item to make sure this PLCs receives the patch it needs in a timely manner. So for the purpose of this demo, we're going to assign this task to Troy. Troy then creates a change request in order to implement the patching on these PLCs on these devices. Now, these are some of the out-of-the-box change process of workflows, but depending on your workflow, you could add more or change some of this, whether it needs an approval, whether it needs to go through a change advisory board and things like that. But this is kind of where we can really see the power of ServiceNow operational technology solution, because what Troy's going to do is going to, using the schedule assistant, Troy can schedule the actual change, patching of the PLCs in the next planned downtime, right? All without having to leave the workspace he's already in, right? And this is huge. So then, and through the magic of the demo, we'll just say this is exactly what happened. The patches were successfully applied to the PLC during the scheduled downtime. The vulnerabilities were resolved, and the remediation progress is 100%, right? Pretty cool, right? But that's kind of like the high level overview of discovering, finding vulnerability, executing the patching, workflow, and kind of making sure the system is up and running, right? So I know that's kind of a short, amount of time. In this short amount of time, what I cover is pretty comprehensive end to end. But the main points to kind of take away from this presentation and demo are, you can have a complete visibility of all your assets on one platform. You can achieve faster resolution time with the schedule assistant. And I even touched the Now Assist, which is some of the GenAI capabilities when it comes to knowledge management and a playbooks approach. And then the third key takeaway is kind of improve your OT security posture from discovery to remediation. So that kind of covers the demo. I think, Brad, you have some additional